Hello, hello. Welcome to Inner Work for Greater Good. My name is Emily Eldridge. As always, I am the founder of Change Light, the creator of the Change Light system and the drawing out process, where you can learn for free at our free community at changelight.world or community.changelight.world. And I am here to teach you so many different things that I've learned in my journey and things I'm still learning in my journey and still processing for myself, in the hopes that that'll really help you to process what's going on with you and understand yourself more clearly and do that inner work that's necessary to really do greater good in the world, to be better, to feel better, to have a greater difference in everyone around you, and to just like be your amazing, shining, lovely, radiant self, because that to me is the whole purpose of being here. So I want to help you do that. um, Here's something that I'm going to be honest, really triggers me. Now I got to figure out, does this trigger me because it resembles me? Do you know how like things can trigger us because really like we're guilty of that because we do the same thing? Or does it trigger us because it really bothers us when other people, you know, don't get something that we get so clearly? There can be all different reasons, I think, why we're triggered. But one of my big triggers is when people make excuses. Excuses. So obviously this has come up for me recently. I have, there's some people in my life, without obviously getting into specifics, who were in situations that are not entirely healthy for them, and in fact are actually very hurtful for them. Or maybe it can be, in another case, it's just where they're just like not taking action. They have power in a certain situation, and it's not necessarily hurtful or harmful, but rather than kind of go, you know what, I'm going to do this, or come up with some kind of idea, it's just like, oh well, there's nothing I can do, and they make excuses for their own, whether it's victimization or for their own like impotence. I don't mean sexual impotence. I mean just lack of taking action, or just try to go, well, and just sort of accept what is, when actually they totally have the ability to change the situation for the better, and even in sometimes it won't just change it better for them, but it will actually change it for the better for others as well. And so, I sit here and I look at this and I'm just like, oh my God, why don't you just do this or do that? Why can't you just make a different choice? Why can't you see that you have power in the situation? Why do you keep making excuses for that person that you're with? Why do you keep putting up with horrible behaviors, and allowing yourself to be abused? I mean, obviously I'm dealing with different levels of excuses here, right? Excuses, staying in a relationship that's not healthy, or a situation that's not healthy, or excuses of like just sort of putting up with things and not actually trying to find a way to make it better for oneself. So, why do people make excuses? Obviously, I would say actually there's one answer, but there can also be different reasons that are sort of underlying, that are kind of like nuances, I guess, of this. But what's the obvious answer? Why do we make excuses? Why do other people make excuses? Because of fear, of course, because we're afraid, because they're afraid. There are reasons why we make excuses for ourselves, for the situation, for the people we're in, for our own inability to get out of something or make a change. When presented with an alternative or with an exhortation that says, come on, you can do this, get out of this isn't healthy for you, what will sometimes we or the other people can do is we make excuses. Well, no, oh, he's really actually a good guy, he's not that bad. That's obviously one. And sometimes when people are in unhealthy or abusive situations. Or it can be just like, well, they don't really need to behave that way. Or it can be, well, but I don't know what to do. It's sort of defaulting to that place of, well, I don't know what to do, rather than actually trying to find out. We all make excuses, and we've all made excuses, I should say, and then we see other people make excuses. And I'll just tell you also, I think what also does trigger me about this is that, and I'm not saying I've made plenty of excuses in my life, or I've rationalized why I've stayed in situations. But I think also because I feel like it's dishonest. And I'll explain that more. I just realized I need to sort of talk about that later. But it's actually Making excuses is actually a form of dishonesty, I think. Not that the reason we're giving is dishonest, but we're being dishonest with ourselves about our own power and our own ability to change. Or maybe that other person is being dishonest about their own power. And I'm not saying they're deliberately trying to lie, but to me, it's just can be so clear. I'm like, what? Why are you making like you can totally do this? You know, so there's a kind of dishonesty there in that the person's not actually seeing themselves clearly and they're not owning their power. So anyway, back to fear. Fear is like underneath pretty much everything that we do that's not healthy for us. Let's just like acknowledge that. But when it comes to when you notice yourself making excuses, as always, I want to give you some like tools to work with or some questions to ask yourself. The first question is, what are the fears? So if you find yourself making excuses, or if you've noticed someone else is making excuses for staying in a situation or their own victimization or whatever, know that it's fueled by fear. And as I say this to you, I'm saying this to myself, because obviously as I started off with this call, you know, this show by saying, episode by saying, I get triggered by this. So it really triggers me, but I have to step back and go, wait a minute, they're just scared. So on the surface, it's coming across as an excuse, which really bothers me and triggers my like dishonesty thing, but it's also that they're scared. And so fears. So since we can't control other people, but maybe if they're open, we can maybe ask them these questions as well. Ask yourself when it comes to excuses, and you find yourself making an excuse or rationalizing or whatever, what are your fears? What are your fears? And one way to ask yourself is, what are you afraid would happen if? Or how are you afraid you would feel? So for example, this person who I know who is in a very unhealthy, abusive situation, and this person's been in this situation for well over a year, and I'm not the only one who's been trying to help them, you know, really see the light on this and say, this isn't healthy for you. And even trying to help them on a deeper level of understanding themselves. You know, it's a question of asking that person, or like I've been in situations that aren't healthy for me. It's like, what am I afraid would happen if I were to leave that person? Or if I were to tell that person that I need to leave? What am I afraid would happen if? Now, the fears can be, we could be afraid of that person's reaction, but we could also be afraid of our own reaction and our own feelings. And so those fears can be multi-layers. It could be afraid of, you know, maybe that they would never be with anybody ever again, or, you know, the fear that one might not be, never find someone else again, or the fear of being alone, or the fear of arousing that person's anger, the fear of more abuse, the fear of, you know, where do I go from here? The death of the dream of that relationship. There can be all kinds of fears that we have. But here's what I've also found too, is that we can have sort of those fears that come immediately to us. But with this next question, we can actually find the deeper reasons for why we make excuses for not stepping into our power on something, or not, you know, standing up to someone, or not making a change. And that we can usually start to figure out the deeper fears by asking this question, which is, where are those fears coming from? So what part of us is carrying those fears, or is holding the core fear that might be fueling what our conscious mind is currently aware of? Like, it could be like with the fear of being alone. That's a huge fear for so many people. Okay, fear of being alone. Well, your adult mind might say, yeah, but come on, like I've got a job, or, you know, I've got a place where I can crash, or, you know, I'll always find someone else I can get on, you know, or a dating site, or I can go do, you know, hiking groups or whatever, and I can meet other people. Okay, fine. But what is really, what is fueling that fear of being alone? What's the deeper part of you that is carrying the really core fears of being alone, and what that could mean? If I'm alone, then that means, like, the meanings that we make out of circumstances in our lives. So like, if I'm alone, then. So that's where you can start with, what are my fears? But then the next level can be, where are those fears coming from inside of me? What parts of me are carrying those fears? And I always, because this is my work and because it is so powerful and it works, is draw out those fears. If you don't yet know how to draw out, take my free course. I teach you all how to do it. It's super, super easy. community.changelight.world. It's free. and it'll teach you how to start drawing out those parts of you, so you can at least put them, get them out of you, get them in front of you. And by doing that, you're also going to have more epiphanies and realizations about where they're coming from and what's fueling their stuff. So looking at the parts of the self, also, where are those fears coming from? What could come up for you is a memory, a particular trauma. Just notice what the subconscious brings to you when you ask, where are those fears coming from? What parts of me or part of me is carrying this fear? Because not the whole self of you is afraid. There are parts of you that are feeling very empowered. In fact, they may be kind of frustrated with you because you are making excuses, and they may be yelling at you like, come on, get out of this. What are you doing? You're crazy. You're stupid, whatever. But that it's not, yes, and that's great. That's why it's important to recognize, okay, but there are parts of you that are scared, that are keeping you stuck or feeling disempowered or believing in your own disempowerment. And also to ask, okay, those fears, how are they trying to protect you, or that part, how is it trying to protect itself? What is it afraid would happen if you were to make that change? Back to that other question. So that's a first element, is fears, is really looking at your fears, drawing them out, helping to release them so that you can have more of that clarity of what's fueling these excuses that you're making. Or even, maybe even helping someone else and guiding them to this work. There's another element of it though too, and I ran into this, for example, with my the friend who's in the unhealthy, toxic, abusive situation. And one of the things that she said made me recognize that, oh, okay, it's not just fear. It's also that there's something that the situation is giving her or providing for her. It's a feeling or an experience that, even though there is all this abuse and manipulation and toxicity, there's also this something that she's getting from it. Because that's the other part of it too. We don't stay in situations just out of fear. Sometimes we stay in them because of what we're getting from it or how we think it's serving us. Okay. And that's something you got to take an honest look at too. And so that's something you can ask yourself, if I'm making excuses for my own disempowerment or for not making a change, okay, well, how is this situation serving me? I mean, maybe it might be a situation of being in a complete state of, inertia and not doing anything. And maybe it's a job that you're in. Maybe it's, it's a relationship. Maybe it's, something that's just going on in your daily life, that you keep running into but haven't made any changes about. You can also ask yourself, on the flip side, not just the fear, but also, how is this serving me? What am I getting from this? And that's something that's really, really important to recognize, because in terms of the situation that I just mentioned with my friend, who was just the dearest, sweetest, kindest, most wonderful woman, and that's why it's just so awful to see her in this abusive situation, is that one of the things that she said, I made me reply, what I'm hearing from that is that really what you're really needing and seeking is tenderness and care and affection and attention, and for someone to say that they love you. And she said, yeah, that's really what I want. And so then that prompted me to ultimately say, you can have those things from someone else without the abuse. So that's where, when we're making excuses, it can be because we might be compromising. And ultimately, they're compromising ourselves and compromising on ourselves, where we're like, well, I'm putting up with this, but it's because I'm getting this. But what I also, just for the record, or just in case it's helpful, what I also explained to her, though, is I said, that's the classic, like victim of abuse statement. But he's not that bad all the time. But she's still, she does things for me. He brings me flowers. It's not so awful. Well, that's not really what it's about. It's, and sometimes that's even part of the manipulation. There's the abuse, and then it's, oh, but I'm so sorry, and I'm going to give you flowers, as though that's going to make up for the fact that they just abused you or manipulated you in some way or another, or used you. And so that's where, but at the same time, that's where it's important to acknowledge both that we might be scared, and that there's something that we're staying in the situation because it's giving us something, some kind of feeling or experience that is really what it is that we really, really want to experience. And so we're putting up with all the other crap because that's what we want. But what that can do, as I already kind of pointed out with her, is what that can do, though, is it can trick us into thinking that we have to put up with this in order to get this. And I'm going to tell you right now that is BS. There might be some circumstances where, yeah, that's what you got to do. Let's say you signed up for a marathon and you're going to do that marathon and you've been training for that marathon. And in order to run that marathon that day, it starts raining. And it's like, you might say, well, I'm not going to run in this rain. Well, if you signed up for it and you're committed to it, and you want to do it, you might have to put up with some rain. Okay, right? So that's a choice that you make. But when it comes to things like relationships, no, you don't have to put up with abuse and manipulation and horrible things in order to receive the love, the care, the attention, the affection that you need and you deserve. It doesn't have to be that way. And so that's something else to recognize too when we're making excuses. Why are we making excuses? What is it that we're wanting and that we think we're getting from that situation? But also and at the same time, what are our fears though? What is it that's keeping us stuck there? Maybe it's fear of being alone. Maybe it's fear of actually being criticized. It could be making an excuse for not stepping into your power. And that by not stepping into your power in a situation, there's this sort of comfort, familiarity of being not empowered and kind of not shining your light. But so that's what you feel like you might be getting from it. But then there's also the fear of being criticized. So just a lot of different examples. But I will tell you that ultimately when it comes to excuses and when we're making excuses or rationalizations, there is absolutely, ultimately, there is no peace in doing so. There is no deep fulfillment in doing so. There is no satisfaction. There is no true power. There is no truly honoring your truth and living your truth and shining your brightest by doing so. It just doesn't work that way. When we compromise on something that's such a key part of ourselves, or when we allow ourselves to be subjected to abuse just for something that's an occasional benefit to whatever it is that we might be getting from that person or in that situation, ultimately it degrades the soul to put up with those things. Ultimately, it degrades the sense of self and the trust in oneself. Because even if a part of you might be like, no, I'm okay with this, another part of you is going to know that you're being dishonest with yourself and with what's right for you. So that's something to be aware of. This is not me telling you that you have to take action today. That, oh my God, I'm making excuses. It must mean that I need to get out of this, or it must mean that I need to do something. Okay, yeah. And, maybe at some point, I'm not saying you have to do it now because you might not be ready. You might not feel strong enough. There could be certain things where, you've got to get certain things squared away in order to, create stability for yourself, for the people around you, in order to, take a big step, let's say. But at least start by being honest with yourself. Being honest with yourself. When are you making excuses? When are you rationalizing? Why? What are you afraid of? How do you think this thing is really serving you? But ultimately, this could be another question too, actually, to add to that list. How is this not serving me? How am I ultimately disempowering myself by continuing to make excuses and rationalizations for my own disempowerment? Okay, and lack of action. Whew, this was kind of intense, but I really hope it was helpful. I know this is not fun stuff, but ultimately this is what it's about. Sometimes we have to make really, really excruciating choices. They're not fun. And to be honest with you, that's something actually I told a friend. As I said, I've been that person where other people around me were screaming at me, get the hell out. What are you doing? Why are you with that person? Why do you keep clinging, etc. And it took a number of things for me to finally start to see the light and make those changes. And my God, it was hard and it hurt. However, at the same time, after I made that choice and I did it, I felt free. I felt amazing. I felt so empowered. So that's something to consider too. But on the other side, when you let go of the excuses and the rationalizations and the fears, or at least the lack of the inaction, whatever that is, when you let those things go and you make that choice that you know is right for you, ultimately in your own empowerment, that is the greatest reward. Feels amazing. All right. As always, I hope this is helpful. I'm Emily with Change Light. Please do come to changelight.world. Also, the podcast. I've got a free podcast where you can actually hear people going through the drawing out process. It's really powerful, really amazing. I've got more episodes coming. Just been really busy with a lot of other stuff. But those are coming out soon. Dark Light Truth. Go to my website, changelight.world/podcast. You can see all the good stuff there. All right. Mwah. I love you. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will talk to you again soon next Wednesday. Bye.